What is up, everybody? Episode number. Oh wait, Cope. Are we picking up, or are we? I forgot.
If you want to say 53, you can. Up to you.
Okay.
This would be 53.
No, I know. I didn't know if we were doing a content pickup with Riley, and then I know we talked about it.
We'll figure it out later. You
Okay,
really hit us with a pump fake there.
I did it. The D Wade. All right, all right. We'll try this
For real
again
this time.
for this time. All right, three, two, one. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Big Five Pod. Coming at you with another episode right now, and another guest that we're happy to have on here, Riley Frain from the Portal Report, St. Joe's alumni. Riley, how we doing?
I'm great. Jake, Kyle, thank you guys so much for having me on. It's a pleasure. I'm doing well. I'm just happy to be on here. Excited to talk some Big Five hoops with you guys. I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and of course, we have our one and only Jake Copestick here with us. Cope, how are we?
We're good. We're good. I see the smoke from Canada returned. A little hazy today. But other than that, I'm good. Riley, thank you for being on. Needed a St. Joe's guy. We're going to try and get around every Big Five school, but you're like a jack of all trades. You got some recruiting, you got transfer portal, you're a Big Five guy. Perfect guy to have on here.
Yes, sir. I'm happy to talk St. Joe's, but I feel like we're going to touch on it all today. So we'll get after it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh
You
yeah,
will.
absolutely, absolutely. All right. Well, first let's talk a little bit about you. Obviously you're at the Portal Report right now. You previously did some work with MLS. Obviously, I work for the union, so we kind of shared that a little bit before we started recording here. But tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into work in basketball and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so obviously, you mentioned it at the top of the interview here. I'm a St. Joe's grad. I graduated 2 years ago in 2021. And so during my time at St. Joe's, I was a student journalist. I had the opportunity to kind of cover the men's basketball team. Kind of the big highlight for me during my coverage was having the opportunity to cover the transition between Coach Martelli and Coach Lang there. And then from there, I moved on to being a sports editor for the student newspaper at St. Joe's. And since my graduation, I've had a couple different opportunities. You mentioned, getting to cover MLS there, but on the basketball side of things, I've been writing for SB Nation's Mid Major Madness. I do a lot of East Coast basketball coverage for them. I've had the opportunity to go to the last two men's basketball East Coast regionals for the NCAA tournament, which has been really cool. Doing a lot of coverage there. And then, you mentioned it as well, most recently, working for the Portal Report, which has been really cool. We do a lot of different, work with college basketball programs, helping them, scout and recruit from the transfer portal, as well as just doing, general transfer portal coverage. So, I'm assuming that's what we're going to touch on today. A lot of that, some of the, Big Five, transfer portal stuff going around lately.
Yeah, for sure. True jack of all trades you are, Riley, for sure. Doing all that,
That's
doing the
right.
soccer stuff too. So, hey, let's hop right into the transfer portal. So, I want to ask you a general question to start. So, last few days we saw Javon Quinterly and Jordan Brown jump in the portal. Obviously, they're grad transfers. They're not going to get penalized to go play next year. But I did see a tweet from Jeff Goodman today that the Division One Council basically got notified that a majority of the undergrad two-time transfers are getting their waivers denied and are not going to be able to play this
Mhm.
next season. They're going to have to sit. Personally, I don't like that. I think they should have they should have let everybody know before they hopped in the portal because correct me if I'm wrong, this was the most players ever in the transfer portal, about
Yeah,
1,800.
no, yeah, I believe so. I don't have the number in front of me or anything, but I think this year's been chaotic and we've surpassed all the numbers by far at every
Yeah,
level, Division One, and I know Division Two as well for sure.
it's been wild. There's been so many, but now they're coming down and saying that you're gonna have to sit. So I wanted to ask you, like, then this is before this that report even came out. Like, I see Javon Quinley, Jordan Brown, they get in the portal the end of June. It's like you're one of the best players on your team. I don't think it's good for the sport because these teams that think they're concrete, that think they have their team set, are now without some of their best players. So I wanted to ask you kind of a couple of things about that. Do you think that at some point, now that this has been open season pretty much with the transfer portal, are we going to see the NCAA make stricter deadlines and have stricter guidelines? And what do you make of this rule that a lot of these two-time undergrad transfers who hopped in the portal not knowing this is going to happen might have to sit?
Yeah, so I think it's obviously a tough situation. It kind of switches from program to program. I think, the big example that's been front and center for me really was the situation with, I don't know how familiar you guys are with it, but Jose Perez, who moved from Manhattan after last season. His coach was fired literally just weeks before the season started. He tried to move to Manhattan, tried to move down to West Virginia to play this season, and he never ended up getting a waiver despite how hectic the situation was over there at Manhattan. And so we had to sit the year. And, obviously now there's been another big coaching break over at West Virginia with Coach Huggins having to step down. And so, yet again, we see another crazy situation where a guy doesn't really know what to do and doesn't really know if he should hit the portal. And his situation is, a little chaotic. And the NCAA hasn't really been friendly to him in granting a waiver. And so I think it's a crazy time, but nonetheless, you see guys hitting the portal in hopes of finding a better situation, kind of not really knowing what their waiver situation is going to be like if they're going to be able to acquire one. And I think another thing you kind of mentioned there, Jake, was moving forward, having the opportunity to set stricter guidelines so the players are more familiar with which deadlines they have to meet to be able to acquire those waivers. And I think it's something the NCAA is going to do. I think it's something they've slowly been kind of doing over the past season and a half, I would say, is they're trying to implement some of those stricter deadlines, which is good. I think it's a step in the right direction, but a lot of this waiver stuff, I think just generally speaking, really needs to be sorted out. And I think definitely setting stricter guidelines, making sure the players know what situations are when it's appropriate to enter the portal and you'll be granted a waiver, maybe when it's not so appropriate, and as well as just the proper dates that they can be entering the portal, because it does create a lot of chaos and puts a lot of guys in unsure situations where I think they enter the portal not really knowing what's going to happen next year. And a lot of times you see guys who they don't end up with a program the next year and they end up having to sit out a year without anywhere to play, and it's just really tough overall, I think.
Yeah, a bunch of great points there. I always wondered about that, especially with like 1,800 players in the portal. Like, there's not a spot for everybody. You got incoming freshmen. You have JUCO and D2 guys coming up. Like, there's not room for everybody. Granted, some guys will transfer down, and some guys run out of eligibility, so there is some come and go. But with so many guys entering, and then if you don't leave because of a coaching change or something like that, like you're in football, maybe that works at times, but not really in basketball. And then that Jose Perez situation, we touched on John Gallagher when he left Hartford, and then when he got to Manhattan, and like that was just a ridiculous situation. He should have got a waiver last year, to be honest with you. It was ridiculous that he did it, and then obviously it would be a crime if they didn't give him one this year. I mean, they if he decides to leave, they absolutely have to give him one. So one more question before we get down to business in the Big Five. You being the portal report guy, with shout out to you guys in the craziness of it all.
Seriously.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. It's been all the guys over there putting in a lot of hard work, so we appreciate it. Thank you very much, guys. We do.
Pleasure's ours. I mean, you guys helped us out so much. I mean, with all the craziness and everything, not knowing like who's officially visiting where, who's interested in whoever. Like, you guys were such a big help to us. But you being the portal report guy, give me a guy who transferred maybe to like into a Power 5 school, went from the SEC to Big East, you know what I mean, transferred from one Big 5 school to another, or transferred up from a mid-major school to a Power 5 school that you think is flying under the radar. Give me somebody I should be looking out for next year that moved schools.
Oh, somebody that's flying under the radar. All right. I mean, so I know we'll probably get into some of the specific transfer additions, so maybe I'll just touch on someone quickly. But I think, and I'm going to butcher the last name here, but I Temple added a guy this offseason. His name is Matteo Piccarelli from UMBC.
Yeah, we
really
talked
great
a
season
lot about
last
him.
year.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a guy who flew obviously a little under the radar. He's an international guy, and Temple just had a ton of offseason roster turnover this year. So I think he's going to get a lot of minutes, maybe a little bit of an undersized guard. I think he's like 6'2", 6'3", but averaged, I think almost 11 points at UMBC last year, a couple assists. He's going to do a lot defensively as well. And so I think he's probably flying a little bit under the radar just because he's coming from, a much smaller mid-major program, at UMBC. But I think he's got a lot to offer on both sides of the ball, really. And, is going to be real valuable to Temple, given how, some of the pieces they're losing this offseason, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing you bring up with him is, he's a flamethrower from three, and that's going to be Adam Fisher's style at Temple. He talked about a lot in the press conference that Cope and I were fortunate enough to attend his introductory press conference, where he said, we're shooting threes and we're running the floor. And he pointed to Emmanuel Okpoma, who was in the back, and said, that guy's going to be shooting threes. He was everybody who's coming into this program is shooting threes, even if you're not maybe the best at it. But I do want to talk about Temple and Adam Fisher a little bit more. Obviously, you mentioned that they've been active. They've been trying to replace a lot of talented players that we've talked about extensively on this podcast. What would you say? Well, how would you rate their haul this offseason? And what is their outlook for the season coming up here?
Yeah, I mean, I know I just kind of mentioned it, over the last question, but they had a lot to replace this offseason. Some key names, some guys who've been really crucial to the program, I think. And obviously Coach Fisher's first year in charge, so it's I would say an important one. He kind of wants to set the tone, and I think he did a solid job. You got two pretty big, Power 5, Power 6 level pickups between Jordan Riley, Quante Barry. Jordan Riley coming from Georgetown, and Barry joining from Providence. Obviously, Georgetown not the most success over the past couple seasons, but Providence, very strong program, and I think they both have a lot to offer. We obviously touched on Picarelli there, who I think is a really strong mid-major candidate. I do a lot of mid-major coverage, and so I think he's definitely someone who's flown under the radar. And then, the final addition from Howard, they picked up Steve Settle the third. And, I think it's a strong class, 4 additions, pretty strong. I'm not sure if they added any guys from the JUCO level. I don't have that front of mind at the moment. But, I think as far as, the Big Five hasn't been the most active in the transfer portal this offseason, I would say. You don't see any pickups from really LaSalle or St. Joe's. But, as far as Big Five portal additions go, I would say I think Coach Fisher gets a B for his first offseason. He's done a solid job of I think finding a couple under the radar guys from the Power 5 level, bringing them down who are gonna play some key minutes for them next year, as well as finding some guys who are maybe a tier down at the Division I level who are ready to take a step up and are gonna offer a lot, whether it be shooting, as we kind of talked about before, which is expected to be the norm for Coach Fisher's fast-paced offense, I would say, as well as have a lot to offer on the defensive side as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a changing of the guard at Temple. It's definitely going to be something that we're not used to. Not that Fran Duffy had this kind of run and gun style of play. Aaron McKee didn't either. I guess they were, Aaron McKee learned under Fran Duffy, so similar things there. But it's going to be really different this year. I'm really, really excited to see it. Even if the results might not be there year one. I would agree with your assessment. I think he had a decent offseason for him. Changing gears now to Penn, though. A lot of talent leaving, mainly even with one person. Jordan Dingle, obviously going to St. John's. Lucas Monroe, grad transfer too, so he's over at Drexel now. And I'm sure we'll talk about him at some point. But Jordan Dingle, going to St. John's, he's playing under Rick Pitino now. How do you think that pairing is gonna do this season?
Yeah, so listen, I'm a Long Island guy. I know Jordan Dingle is originally from Long Island as well. Coach Pitino as well. I actually, my connection with Coach Pitino is we went to the same high school, not that I know him or anything like that, but nice. I really subtle brag, I suppose. But so I really like the connection there. I think it's a great pairing. Bringing Jordan Dingle home to New York, I think is really exciting. Obviously, that's a big hole in the Penn roster, and certainly not something you could replace just with bringing in one guy this offseason. But I think he's gonna, find a lot of success in New York under Coach Pitino. You can't go wrong with a guy like Coach Pitino. He's gonna coach you hard, but his teams are always gonna play well. They're gonna find success, and I think he's ready to take St. John's to the next level. And I think Jordan Dingle is gonna be a big part of that. I know they bought in a lot of transfer pieces this offseason, but I still think Jordan Dingle, is going to play a big role over there, and will definitely have an opportunity to find a lot of success, whether it be playing at Madison Square Garden or Carnesecca Arena.
I agree 100%. When you take a guy who second leading scorer in America and a top 5 usage rate in America, it's hard to replace that. And unfortunately, like we spoke about with Penn, they had some guys graduate. Lucas Monroe's gone. Jonah Charles has gone off the bench. Max Lorco-Lloyd graduated. Moshkovitz graduated. They have they have a bunch of guys leaving. Mm-hmm. They did bring in Johnny Walter, who we touched on, but he played, he came off the bench last year at CSU Northridge. So he comes in. It's not really often that you see an Ivy League school in the transfer portal, but they plucked one because they had to. Now they have some freshmen coming in, but they got a guy in the portal from the West Coast. Like, not all the time, I guess you see that from an Ivy League school. So switching gears to the Ivy League here, how do we think Penn does with their losses? Obviously, the Ivy League won't be as good. Dartmouth has some guys leave. Princeton, Blake Peters gone. You have Ryan Langford going to Northwestern. Tosan graduated. They still have Matt Alacco and Caden Pierce there, but the conference as a whole. Then you even look at Brown losing Paxton Wojcik to North Carolina. The conference as a whole isn't going to be as good, but at the same time, this Penn team is not going to be anywhere near as good as they were last year, just given don't have Jordan Dingle anymore. So what can we expect from Penn here in the Ivy League?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm not really sure. It's a great question because they've lost it. You know, you highlighted pretty much everyone they lost there this offseason. There hasn't been a ton of replacement. I know it's always tough to get transfers, you know, in the Ivy League. And I think it was always expected they were going to lose a bunch of guys this year, kind of with that extra COVID year of eligibility that the Ivy League guys had. But I think I just want to say Coach Donahue, you know, he always finds a way to succeed over at Penn. And, you know, I don't know that we really know what the roster is going to look like this year. I think there's probably still some work to be done, and I know I've seen reports on Twitter that they've been reaching out to, you know, some of the guys left over in the portal, but they've also been looking at guys at the D2 and the JUCO level, which is certainly, you know, outrageous, you know, of a jump to the Ivy League. And you know, we might not know what that roster is going to look like. I know you mentioned a couple of the returners there, and so you know we'll know a couple names on the roster, but it's going to be almost completely new look over at Penn, and I still think they're going to find a way to, you know, be competitive in the Ivy League, but we're going to really have to wait and see. Sorry, excuse me. We're going to have to really wait and see what their roster looks like ahead of next season.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I like Steve Donahue a lot. Offensively, I mean, they'll slow you down and he'll just play a good half-court game. And they're very, very smart. They cut well, they move well. You're absolutely right. So now let's switch gears to Villanova, who of the Big Five crowd, this was the biggest winner not only in the city but in all of college basketball. This is one of the biggest winners in the transfer portal, and it's not something that they do often. So I can only, off the top of my head, I can think of Tony Chenault, I can think of Caleb Daniels, and I can Eric Pascal and Joe Primo. And after that, I can't really think of another transfer because it's not something that they do often. So then they bring in four guys at once. They get TJ Bamba, Hakeem Hart, Tyler Burton, three wings that can play positionless 2 through 4 and start right away. And they bring in a center in Lance Ware that gives them something that they haven't had the last couple of years. So where did they rank for you in terms of, obviously they're one of the biggest winners. Did you think this is the best portal haul? Where does this rank for you? And maybe give me one or two guys that intrigue you the most of their haul.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely got to be top 10 in the country. I don't know necessarily where I'd put it front of mind, but you know, you kind of mentioned it there, Jake. It's definitely one of the best portal halls in the country. And yeah, I mean, you guys, you know, I'm not a Philly native. You guys have definitely been entrenched in the Big Five culture a little longer than I have. So you know, maybe some of their transfers would be a little more front of mind, but you know, I really can't think of a lot of guys they've bought in over the past 10, 15 years even. But you know, still this year, I think you know, Coach Neptune is doing things a little differently than Jay Wright did, and you know, we're seeing that really this offseason, and you know, some big transfer additions. You kind of named them all there, but you know, I'll just go over all again. You know, Hakeem Hart coming in from Maryland, TJ Bamba from Washington State. You know, Lance Ware, another big pickup from Kentucky, and then rounding it out was Tyler Burton from Richmond. And you know, so I think for me, the first guy I kind of want to touch on is Tyler Burton. So I had the pleasure of, you know, covering the A10 tournament. You know, before this offseason at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. And I mean, Richmond didn't go as far as they maybe would have hoped for. You know, obviously, Coach Mooney's health was a problem, and he couldn't be there on the sideline, which, you know, it was just a tough situation overall. But Tyler Burton, man, he really stands out. That's a guy who, you know, he can get to the bucket, can score from almost anywhere on the floor. He's just athletic. He's long. He's quick. He just does everything right. He's strong on the defensive end, is going to block some shots. And I really thought he was a guy who was going to stay in the NBA draft. So, you know, especially as a St. Joe's guy, I was, you know, a little disappointed to see Tyler Burton return and end up at Villanova. So he's definitely, I think, is a big addition for me. And you know, I think they're all pretty strong additions. But I think I'm also excited to see, you know, Hakeem Hart, a guy who had a lot of success at Maryland, but someone else, you know, who again disappoints me as someone who was originally committed to St. Joe's before you know, Martelli had to leave, which I think is kind of the big talk there among, you know, the St. Joe's fans that he ended up at Villanova. But you know, I think he's a really exciting addition. I think, you know, you can kind of play him almost anywhere on the floor. He's sorry, you can kind of play him anywhere on the floor. He's a guy who can do a little bit of everything. Obviously, you know, offers you a little bit more size wise, but he's athletic. He can score, and you know, I think he's got a lot to offer defensively as well. So I would say between Burton and you know, Hakeem Hart, you got a lot to offer there. But you know, obviously 4 pretty strong Power 5, Power 6 additions. Lance Ware, kind of a younger guy. I think he's going to offer a lot to the future of the program, but you know, I think Burton and Hart are going to play, you know, some major roles there next year for sure.
Absolutely. And I mean, on top of that, all those additions are going along with Justin Moore and Eric Dixon and Mark Armstrong and Brandon Housen. Like they're going to be loaded next year. I mean, Kobe and I have talked about this. I think at least the top 20 team right now, you could make the argument for top 15.
100%.
Top 10 is probably where you get a little bit iffy. You'd probably lose me a little
Sure.
bit there, but they're a good team. I could definitely see them being a second weekend team in the tournament next year for sure. One team that might not be quite there, the LaSalle Explorers. They haven't really done a ton this offseason. They lost Josh Nickelberry. They went the international route on a transfer here. But what do you make of LaSalle's offseason, and where do you see them in terms of next season?
Yeah, it's been quiet, and I think the losses will be huge, but they've done a really, I think this international recruiting they've kind of done under Dunphy over the past 2 seasons has been really interesting. I think it's a unique route, and they've found a little success. Obviously, I think the two guys, the two guys they'll bring in over, between this season and last season are both relatively young, but I think both offer a lot of potential. And, I think maybe a lot of people didn't expect Dunphy to be, in this LaSalle program for the long haul once again. But I think this kind of gives me hope that he will be, that he's looking to, to continue to build something here. And I think that should excite LaSalle fans. While, the roster might not be what they were hoping for this offseason. And maybe there haven't been a ton of reports on Twitter of, guys receiving interest from LaSalle or anything like that. I think, there's a lot to be excited about with LaSalle basketball. I think, last season is definitely going to be looked at as a success, especially after, the wins at the A10 tournament. So I think, looking ahead again, the roster might not be there, and it might not be, they might have not picked up one of the exciting names that I think LaSalle fans were looking for, but I think, there's something to build on here, and Dunphy's kind of pointing this program in the right direction, which is just great to see, for the Big Five as a whole, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listen, tell me if you've heard this before, but Fran Dunphy having some success at a Big Five school.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, this is what he does. He's Mr. Big Five for a reason. So definitely could see them turning it around even more next year, for sure. But speaking of some wins in the A10 tournament, let's get to your school now. Why don't we? St. Joe's Hawks. They're interesting because on paper, in terms of the resume of Billy Lang, it's not great. 38-77 over 4 seasons. Obviously, COVID was a difficulty early on for him. But on paper, this team's pretty damn good next year. And I think top 3 in the A10 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my expectations, though. What are yours for the St. Joe's Hawks team?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now the conversation has kind of been top 3, top 5, which is nice. But there's obviously still some transfers and roster moves to be made this offseason for a lot of other A10 programs. But I think this roster is exciting. It's young, which is good. Outside of maybe Cam Brown and Charles Coleman are kind of the exceptions I could think of at the moment. But I don't think that's, necessarily a bad thing. I think it's young with some good experience between, guys like obviously Eric Reynolds, who's, been playing for 3 years, Lynn Greer, who's, ready to get a second year under his belt. Obviously, I just mentioned Cam Brown, who's really the big senior on the roster. But on top of that, I think it's young with some really exciting young names. I mean, I think this is one of the best incoming freshman classes that St. Joe's has had, maybe in the last 10 years, I want to say. And I think we'll get to kind of touching on some of those St. Joe's incoming freshmen in a couple minutes. But, between that, they've had a lot of guys who maybe sat redshirt 1 year and are now coming in, which I think was big for experience. Obviously, that was kind of Lynn Greer's role 2 years ago. But this year, Christos and Doko, who redshirted last year. And I think people who have been in and around the program a little more than me and who have been, attending practices and have been able to see some offseason workouts have, spoken really highly of Doko, which I think, gets really St. Joe's fans really excited. And so I think, the hope is just, this is the season where it's going to come all together, where it's really going to culminate between, Coach Lang and his staff doing a great job recruiting and hopefully, starting to get things right from a coaching standpoint and getting the team clicking on the floor together. I think people think this is, really the year. And I think there's a lot of pieces there. I think, Cam Brown, obviously being a senior leader and coming back was a big deal. But on top of that, being able to return pretty much the whole roster, all the important key pieces was big. And so, I think it's kind of just all culminating and bubbling up in a lot of excitement for St. Joe's fans. But I think, definitely at the moment, you're looking at the top half of the A10, like a top 5 team. I definitely think they're in that conversation. No problem. A team that should be, advancing a couple rounds in the A10 championship. But, again, there's still a lot of offseason moves to be made. And, I think if you come back to me in a couple of weeks, I might have a different answer. Who knows?
I definitely agree with you. Here's my thinking. Talent wise, they're top 3. You've Dayton's losing a lot of guys. Now they're bringing back Deron Holmes, but they've lost some guys. Tumani Kamara got drafted. I really like VCU, even with Ryan Odom being a first-year coach. I think VCU's in that conversation. And guess what? It might sound crazy for you being an A10 guy that covers them a lot. This might be a deep St. Bonaventure team. They might actually have a bench for once, and that scares me because I think very, very highly of Mark Schmidt. But you basically talked about my question before I could even ask it. But let's talk about that recruiting class. So they bring in Romans, Anthony Finkley, and Xavier Brown, and Camden's Desir Haskins. Sean Simmons joins the team last year during the winter semester. And then Chris Esendoko was on campus but did not play last year. He will be eligible to play this year, but he's been on campus for a little bit. So now that you have all these guys, you're absolutely right. It's a great blend of talent and a great blend of experience with some fifth years, some juniors, some sophomores. It's an awesome, awesome blend of talent. So of these incoming freshmen, because there's a lot of returners. I mean, you're absolutely right. They lost Obina, and outside of that, pretty much everybody else stayed. So you can't play 13 guys unless you're maybe Leonard Hamilton or somebody like that. But of these freshmen, who intrigues you the most, and who's got the best chance to play big minutes right away?
All right. So I think I want to give you. So I think I'll give you two answers because I think I have one guy who I think is going to get big minutes, and maybe someone who's flying a little more under the radar. So I think the answer to your question, if we're including Esendoko, because he's not really a part of this year's recruiting class, I think Esendoko is going to be the big guy who gets minutes. He's going to play a very similar role to Obina last year, but from what I'm hearing, he's definitely more of an athletic passer, can shoot the ball a little better, which is exciting. So if we're including Esendoko, I think he's the guy. If we're not so much talking Esendoko, I think Xavier Brown is definitely going to be is going to slot in. Billy Lang likes to play these guards, and I think Xavier Brown is seen as one of the best guards in the Philly area. Definitely one of the best ball handlers in the Philly area. So I think he really is going to slot into Billy Lang, the style Billy Lang likes to play very well. These fast-paced, quick guards who will put up a lot of shots and can pass well. He slots into that role perfectly. So I think between him and Esendoko, if you're counting Esendoko, those guys are gonna be the two getting big minutes next year. Now, I think the guy who's flying under the radar for me, and the reason for that being probably because he committed, pretty late for the class of 2024, is Desir Haskins. And I think why I say he's flying under the radar is just because he's not getting the same hype as maybe Finkley or Brown or Simmons coming in, but he's been, really exciting as far as, playing into the summer window. I know he was co-MVP at the Iverson Classic 24K Showcase, which was a big deal. And he just reminds me a lot of a guy already on the roster, and Rasheer Fleming. So, I think between those two, you're going to get players who kind of mirror each other, but Desir Haskins kind of flying under the radar, similarly to Rasheer Fleming. So he might not play a ton next year, but I think he's a guy that offers a lot to the future of the program. And, committing so late, fans just aren't talking about him as much, but I think he could be a guy that, a couple years down the line is providing a lot to this program.
All right, so Riley, again, you stole the words right out of my mouth. I was going to ask a question, and then you already talked about it in your last answer, but I want to really talk about Rasheer Fleming, who was very impressive last year. I think that surprised me the most about him was reading the City Basketball Love article. They interviewed Billy Lang, and he said that he recruited Fleming out of Camden. He was young. He didn't play a ton during high school, wanted to redshirt him. He gets thrown in the first game of the year against Houston, who I thought was going to be the champion. A lot of other people did, and he played very well defensively, and they pretty much outplayed Houston in the second half of that game, and he was terrific. I'm expecting a big sophomore year leap from him. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are expecting a big jump from him. And I guess that's why I said he kind of reminded me of, Haskins being an under-recruited guy who didn't play as much as, he was maybe looking to his senior year of high school. But Fleming offers a ton. He found a ton of success last year. He was a blast to watch. I got to cover the Hawks a couple times throughout the season, but he really showed up at the A10 tournament as well, kind of in some of those clutch moments for the Hawks, I thought, and just overall played well in the game throughout the tournament. And so I think a lot of fans are kind of looking for him to take a big jump this year. I think you're going to see him play some more minutes. With Obina kind of stepping out, and some of the younger guys on the team, because he's not one of the younger guys on the team. He played last year. He's got a season under his belt. He showed what he could do, and I think he's got a lot to offer. Obviously he's a little bit more of an interior presence, but he can shoot it from outside too. He can move the ball well. He's quick, athletic. He's lanky, and I think Hawk fans have something again, to be really excited about. I feel like I'm going to say that about all the young guys on this roster. I really think a lot of the young guys here are something to be excited about. Rasheer in particular, who I mentioned I've had an opportunity to cover and watch. And I think he's got a really unique skill set, which is maybe another reason he's kind of flown under the radar. But, you talked about the City of Basketball Love article, Jake, with, the Billy Lang interview. And I feel like something I've kind of maybe mentioned before is if Billy says something about a player, Coach Lang rather, if Coach Lang says something about a player, a particular attribute about a player, I believe it because he said things about guys in the past. Jordan Hall stands out. He talked about Jordan Hall coming in as a freshman and being one of the best ball handlers and passers he's ever worked with. And, obviously Coach Lang being a guy who's been at the NBA level, he knows NBA level talent. He knows guys who can play. And, I think he knows good basketball as well. And so, he says Rasheer Fleming is a guy who flew under the radar, but he thinks can find a lot of success. I'm certainly inclined to believe with Coach Lang based on what I've seen myself.
Yeah.
No,
mean,
agree.
listen,
Yeah, agree for sure.
the record might not be there right now, but it does seem like he knows what he talks about when bringing in young guys and getting his roster together. But speaking of young guys, the recruiting dead period is over. Philly Live period 1 just took place last week, and it seems like damn near every Big Five school, probably every Big Five school, has been really active in getting these prospective recruits, whether it's offers or interest of any kind or whatever. There's a few Philly guys that we want to ask you about, though, so we're going to get right into it. First and foremost, Archbishop Woods, Jalil Bethea, recently ranked as high as number 9 on the ESPN Top 100. So he's a top 10 recruit coming from an area that Cope and I grew up right outside of. So I want to ask you more about him. What do you think his perspective? I was going to say prospective prospects. It's not exactly how that works in the English language. What do you think his prospects are, and what school could you see him fitting in with pretty well that has shown interest?
Yeah. I mean, Archbishop Wood, pretty good basketball program. They've certainly found a lot of success over the past couple of seasons. And Jalil, top 100 prospect. He's got a ton of offers. I think he's got 20 or he's got 20 plus at this point. I would say has been receiving interests and offers from multiple Big Five programs. I think Nova, Temple, and SJU are all in the mix there. For a local guard, as you mentioned, and I believe I just saw he won offensive MVP at the Nike Elite Youth Basketball League, which was, I think that's a pretty big deal. Obviously, a lot of talent playing in some of those offseason showcases. And I think he's got a ton to offer. I think, maybe the outlook is probably a little bit more Power 5 at this point, Power 6 level, somewhere around there. And I know he's got offers from schools like West Virginia, Virginia Tech. Obviously, we mentioned Nova and, Temple in the mix as well. So, maybe a school like SJU might be a little bit beat on Jalil, but he's very talented. He's a scoring first guard who, scores it in droves. He's dropping 25 plus a game almost every time. It feels like, I think he averaged 18 or 19 at that, Nike Elite Youth Basketball League regular season. But, I think he's got a lot to offer. I just think his talent is probably looking a little more, high major Power 5 level at the moment.
I would agree, and especially him playing that well, he now gets elevated into that top 10. And I know Nova brought him in for a visit recently, but I think you're absolutely right. Now that he's top 10, if he doesn't have just about every Power 5 school on him, I mean, he's going to. So I want to ask you about 2 more Philly guys. One who's going to make a decision tomorrow, but before that, I want to get to Jaron McKee from St. Joe's Prep, of course, the son of Aaron McKee. So recently, after the recruiting dead period, he's already got 3 Big Five offers. I know we got St. Louis as well, but Temple, where his father went to school and coached, and then St. Joseph's as well offered him. So do we think that, I think that Jared McKee would probably want to stay home. But then if that's the case, what of these programs do you see him going to? Like, obviously, his father still works at Temple. Like, that's the inside track, even though he's not the coach there anymore. But maybe can we see Villanova get in this mix? Like, whatever school he decides to go to, and he's not going to have a short list of suitors. What are they going to get in Jaron McKee?
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of mentioned a lot of programs he's been getting interest from there. He really is just a Philly guard through and through. I think even further than that, he's just been getting interest from a lot of local programs. I'm not sure if you mentioned UPenn there, but I think Penn State was also in the mix, as well as Bucknell. With John Griffin, former St. Joe's assistant in charge over there now. But obviously, you're gonna have to keep a close eye on Temple for this one for sure. Obviously, Coach Mackey is a massive part of the Temple athletics department over there. But you're going to get a strong guard, 6'3" guard, I believe, can score with the best of them. And I think I read something the other day that one of the coaches at one of his all-season showcases just described him as like looking comfortable on the floor. He's comfortable with the ball in his hands. He moves it well. Obviously, he's a guy who's been around basketball and, winning basketball at that pretty much his whole life, I'm imagining. But he's a guy who, he just looks comfortable out there is really the best way to describe it. He moves the ball well, he shoots it well, he's going to score, a lot. And anyone who, adds him to their roster, that's what they're going to get, is a guy who can score, he can pass it well, sees the floor well, but overall it's just he's comfortable being out there. I think he just loves being around basketball, and is a guy who, as I mentioned, has really just been around in his whole life. And I think that shows in his game. It's something you could see.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and especially being the son of Aaron McKee, he's probably getting really good coaching even just in his living room. The last one of these Philly guys I want to mention, touched on it earlier, Christian Bliss from the George School. He had announced his Final Four 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's Villanova, Miami, Virginia, and Xavier. He has gone on official visits to all of these schools. He is going to make his decision tomorrow. So I hate to have to do this. I'm going to ask you if you've heard anything, because this episode won't drop until after tomorrow, so you won't be spoiling any news. You won't be stepping on any toes. But are you hearing anything about a decision? And what's Villanova getting in a guy like Christian Bliss if you were to commit there? Because they have missed out on a couple local recruits in recent months.
Yeah, so I won't say I've heard anything directly. From what we've kind of been talking about at work, it seems like maybe Virginia has a lot of the momentum. I know he, literally just announced a couple hours before we hopped on the show here that he would be committing tomorrow. So, I like you said, this will be dropping after, so we'll kind of have to wait and see. But hopefully, he ends up with a Big Five program in Villanova. He's a guy I'd really like to watch. I think he's 6'4", so a little bit of an oversized combo guard. Great ball handler. He would be elite at Villanova, I think. Obviously, he'd be a little young coming in, freshman, but I think he could develop into a really top-notch ball handler at a school like Villanova. He could shoot it well. Is a guy with great athleticism. But I just come back to the ball handling. He's great. He moves the ball well. He really moves all over the floor well. Defensively, I think he slides well. He could guard. He's a little bit oversized at 6'4", so he can kind of guard 3 through 5, which is nice. But again, I go back to his offensive game, and from the film I've seen highlights a lot of coaches. From what I've heard, he's just such an elite ball handler. He's an elite guard. Can shoot it well, and I think if he ends up at Villanova, is definitely going to be a huge developmental piece for Coach Neptune, and potentially the ball handler of the future, the leading point guard of that program.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be a huge get, and not that they haven't had huge gets already this offseason.
Sure.
But it definitely would be a different kind of get, obviously, on the recruiting front. All right, we're getting toward the end here. Got a couple more from me, one more from Cope. These are some of the hard-hitting ones, though, so get ready. Not that we haven't had them already, but you'll see what I mean. Listen, we're the Big Five pod, so we got to talk about the Big Five Classic, the triple header that's going to be played at the Wells Fargo Center this year. It was just announced this year. Drexel being added to the fold as well. You got the pods now. A lot of changes in the Big Five. What do you make of all this? What do you think? Do you think it's good for the Big Five, bad for the Big Five? Are you indifferent? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get to cover kind of the unveiling. I know it had been announced a couple months in advance, but I was lucky enough to get to go down and cover the unveiling of that at the Comcast Center, which was great. So not that there was any inside information or anything like that, but it was just great to hear from Coach Dunphy and a couple of the other coaches who were present. Really about the opportunity for Drexel to join the group, as well as the new formatting. And I think it's exciting. Obviously, it's going to be at a big arena next year, which is great. I think it's interesting that they're going to kind of knock it all out in a matter of a week, really. Maybe you'd expect a little more fanfare from the Big Five, but I think the formatting is good. I'm hopeful they'll switch up the pods from year to year. There really wasn't a ton of conversation or clarity about that. I don't want it to be, the same teams kind of playing each other over and over again, and you just hope for something different, in the finals or for the second place game. But even further than that, I think I hate to, kind of sound like a broken record here, like all the other maybe Big Five fans out there, but I am a little disappointed to see it's not at the Palestra.
Yes, that was going to be my follow-up. So you beat me too.
Yeah. So I think then I'll dive right into it. So I'm not even a Pennsylvania native, and I have had the opportunity to go down to the Palestra. But there's like an energy there of like college basketball history. It's not really something you could explain, but the Palestra is just so classic Philly basketball. And obviously, maybe someone will say it gives UPenn a little bit of an advantage, whatever it may be, being their home court and they play there from year to year. But, I just think that's where this tournament needs to be. And that's what Big Five basketball is all about. And I think even a lot of the coaches would say that. But, with Comcast sponsoring the whole tournament and everything like that, it obviously makes sense, that they'd have it at the 76ers arena there. Nonetheless, I think it'll still be a great event for Big Five basketball. I'm just, maybe hopefully we'll get like a 10th anniversary reunion at the 5th anniversary reunion at the Palestra or something like that. They talked a lot about maintaining like the traditions of Big Five basketball and everything like that. And so, I'm hopeful they'll be able to do that in some fun ways, despite maybe, taking the event to a new venue, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, Cope and I have talked about this numerous times. We both obviously agree that it probably should be at the Palestra, just considering all the history and everything. But the one point I think we also both agree on is that if they want the change to be as big as they say it's going to be and hope it to be, then the Wells Fargo Center can hold a lot more people, and it would make a lot of sense to get a lot of people in the seats if that's the goal, which obviously it should be. So that is that. And also I think I did hear, and Cope, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think I did hear the pod's going to switch every 2 years.
Okay.
Yep.
I could be wrong. But I think that's what they said when we went down there for the Wells Fargo Center for the announcement of that. The official announcement of that.
I apologize. I called it
No.
Comcast Center. So
Oh, you're good.
Okay.
You're good. Do
Is
not
that
worry
the old
about it.
name? Is that where I'm getting it from?
The old name was the
I mean,
Wachovia Center.
they're owned by Comcast.
Yes.
Okay.
Used to be
All right,
Wachovia Center.
Okay, that's where I was getting it from, the sponsorship. But anyway, so I think it's a really exciting event. There wasn't a lot of clarity on the pod situations from the press release or when we were down at the event. So, thanks for the update there, guys. But nonetheless, I think it'll be a really cool event. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting the opportunity to cover it, next year. I'm just looking forward to more Big Five basketball. You can't go wrong with, more matchups throughout the year. And, overall, I think an exciting tournament for the fans. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We will see you there.
hopefully we can get down there. Yeah, hopefully we can get down there too. And we were actually at the Big Five presser too. We must have passed by and just didn't know each other yet. Oh, good. It was like pretty quick though. It got the point across. It was cool, but it was pretty quick. So last one for you. We've done this for our previous two guests. We said when we had our last guest on that we're probably going to do this for every guest, which means that we're going to rope you into this though. So obviously you're a Long Island guy. You did your college tenure at St. Joe's, so I got to ask you. You got Larry's right there. What's your favorite cheesesteak in the city? Talk to me.
Oh man, it's definitely not Larry's. Larry's is more like where you go to late night with your buddies or something like that. It's not anything too special. I would say if you're willing to wait on the line, I would probably go down to D'Alessandro's because I lived over in Manayunk, which is I know kind of where most of the St. Joe's kids live. So it was really only a quick drive over from there. If you're playing golf over at the Crack the Nut golf course, I think it's called down there, and you get a cheesesteak after with your boys. It's not too bad on late afternoon, something like that. The line's not too bad. So I think I got to go D'Alessandro's. Just probably because proximity, though, I would say.
Fair. Listen, used to be one of my favorite places. I think Cope's too, but it just got to be mid over the last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, so I think to kind of back up my answer is I haven't been to like a ton of other places. Like I never really got down to Pat and Gino's because it was never super close by.
Yeah, you don't need to.
Yeah, you don't need to.
Okay.
It's okay.
Touristy. It's touristy. Listen.
Don't worry about going there.
Cope and I, obviously we talked about this with our previous few guests, but also, we've been friends for however many years now. We've talked about this too with ourselves. Probably the two best places in the city that we can both agree on are Angelo's and John's Roast Pork. So definitely next time you're in the city, try those. Those are phenomenal ones. If you want whiz, John's Roast Pork doesn't have that, but you can always get sharp provolone probably is the suggestion there. And then Cooper Sharp at Angelo's is the cheese to go to. So definitely do that. Last one real quick. St. Joe's beating the streak. St. Joe's breaking the streak this year against Villanova in the Holy War. Oh
man, right after we talked about how they might have like a top 10 portal class in the nation, it's tough. So I think it's funny because there was like a moment there at the end of the season where St. Joe's fans were like, hey, we're looking better than Villanova next year. But then, they quickly swooped in with Hakeem Hart and rounded it out with Tyler Burton. And now it's not looking so good. I think last year we had we had a better shot going in. I think I convinced myself last year we had a better shot going in because the Villanova roster was a little weak for Coach Neptune's first season, obviously. But I think this year it's only stronger, and while St. Joe's has gotten a lot stronger as well, and everyone's kind of matured on a year, I still think it's going to be difficult. I don't know if we'll be able to do it this year. I'm hopeful, obviously. I'm a hopeful St. Joe's fan. So
of course. And I think that one's going to be at the Finn, if I'm not mistaken. So that'll be even harder.
Yeah, of course.
So we'll see. Hey, if there's a team that's going to do it for St. Joe's in the last however many years, it's going to be this team. So
yeah, it certainly feels like it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Riley, that's all we got. Thank you so much for coming on. We greatly appreciate it. Anything you wanna plug here at the end of the show?
No, I mean, you can find me on Twitter at Riley Frain. If you're a fan of mid-major basketball, come check me out. I got coverage all throughout the year, interviewing coaches, transfer portal stuff, mid-major basketball coverage throughout the year. So, come throw me a follow if you're interested. And of course, keep listening to the Big Five pod. These guys do a great job with their coverage as well. So
Man,
thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh,
we
dude,
appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah. Anytime, seriously. Anytime. We very much appreciate you being on here, providing your insight on all things transfer recruits, St. Joe's, cheesesteaks, all that. Cope, any final thoughts here before we sign off?
Riley, happy 4th of July. Kyle, I know you're going to Atlanta for the Union game. So
Yes.
yeah, 4th of July weekend's about to be here. I don't know if you're going to the beach. I'm headed to Seattle for the 4th time this summer because I'm spoiled and I love it there, and I can't
Although
I can't spend like 3 weeks away.
This will be released after July 4th, so that's unfortunate. But
okay. Oh well, then I hope everybody had a good 4th of July.
Yes, yeah. There we go. We're recording a little early. Some scheduling conflicts. I'm moving, so this is actually the last episode that we're doing in this room here. So sorry for you guys who enjoyed the brick behind me, but that will be gone. But I'm moving in with some of my best friends, so I cannot complain about that. So we're getting this out early, taking a little bit of a break so we can keep up with the schedule, but then we'll be back, so don't you guys worry. In the meantime, if you want to keep up with all of our content that we got going on, make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Big Five Pod. Of course, make sure you like and subscribe on our YouTube to see all of this. And if you don't want to see Cope and I's pretty faces every week, make sure you head on over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify to get our audio only versions there. And with that being said, we'll see you guys next time.